Well, how about that new intro? So I have really been spending a lot of time with artificial intelligence. And I'm using it in a way that most of you, not all of you, but most of you would probably not be using it. So I use it as a chat agent in a development environment, and it's generally brought in through an API key or, always an API key. And this is AI on steroids compared to those of you who are still talking to your phones and getting answers. Like, people have created successful YouTube sites they can live off of just asking their AI ridiculous conspiracy questions. But the AI revolution is here. I bear witness, I stand witness. I mean, what you can do with this now is just unbelievable. And it just does everything. And it can code for you or write complicated Python scripts for you. I can do something like, I can just say to the prompt, gather me all the research you can on such and such a topic and prepare a report. And it will go out and prepare a detailed report with all of its footnotes. And then my next command is convert this text file to an MP3 file and use my cloned voice to do it. And it does it. And so it used to be like a year ago, all of these little services were like $20 subscriptions here and there. Clone your voice. And I was going to use that as an option for a read aloud version of The Devil in Us. I haven't done an audiobook for The Devil in Us yet, but maybe I will, maybe I won't, I don't know. I decided not to do it. But my point is that all of these like little AI services you saw, they're all one thing now, and it's like $10 a month is your subscription. It's the best $10 a month I've ever spent. So it's fascinating, and I'm all over it. Anyways, enough of that. I've got a humdinger of a show tonight. I'm going to tie a lot of things together. It's not going to be tremendously surprising for a lot of you. Some of you, maybe. But I don't think anybody's ever tied things together the way I'm doing now. And there's lots of really good sector analysis, I think Michael Yon does a great job with the geopolitics. I don't think he lies about anything. He tells the truth. Green Beret. And I like reading his column and watching his videos from time to time. There are some excellent medical resources out there telling us about what this pandemic was, what the vaccine is, and there's wonderful free thinkers out there literally creating their own languages, like Cliff High. This popped into my head a couple weeks ago. Cliff High is like, he is the 21st century Ezra Pound. And for those of you who know Ezra, either as a poet, as an editor, as a literary critic, as an essayist, as a master of semiotics, language of symbolism, and as an activist and a truth teller, you will begin to build bridges to cliff. I call it almost like psychic cloning. You know the example I give of the three comics being born in Scarborough within a year of each other, Alan Park, Mike Myers, and Jim Carrey? It's kind of like that, but the reality we live in, I have become more and more convinced operates on certain templates. And I think that they're astrological in some way, but beyond astrology even. But let's leave it at that. The podcast is not about Cliff High or his similarities to Ezra Pound. And by the way, if you don't know how I'm saying that, it is a high compliment. I would love to be compared to Ezra Pound, but I am no Ezra Pound. Okay? And you get podcasts that have people, usually ex-occultists, giving us the skinny on what's going on in the dark underground, and that information is kind of like, I don't know how I would describe it. It's, I don't want to sound prejudicial, but a lot of those people, they have a dirt on them they can't get off. You can almost see that occult signature on somebody now. Somebody who's gone too far into the oh, there it is. Okay, so I'll give it a listen in a sec. An AI task just finished. There's a task it's been working on in the background for an hour. Some of the things, by the way, now I know why they started to blow open the CPU architectures 5 years ago with the M1 chip in Mac and the i9 chip on the PC, which were way in excess of anything anyone needed for gaming or video. It was in anticipation of AI, because you need a lot of CPU power to do AI well. Or otherwise, you can start a task, go make your lunch, eat it, come back, and it'll say 30% finished. I've done tasks with my AI. It takes it the whole day to finish. It's like 1960s computing. But the more you use it, the better you get at it. So yeah, those occult people, they kind of like ex-porn stars or ex-prostitutes. They have a kind of a psychic dirt on them that they can't wash off, no matter how many times they shower. And if you have a sense for these things, it's almost like a psychic sense. I would compare it to the sense of smell, but they just have like an auric toxicity to them, so I can't really sit through them. A classic example of what I mean these days is a fellow by the name of Nathaniel Phillips. Sounds exactly, Google will find him for you if you just put it in Google or YouTube. And he's out to all these Christian and occult podcasts peddling this unified theory of the occult and how a single superintelligence is representative of all of the things. Extraterrestrials, demons, everything. And it's an interesting theory and it's amusing, but if you just go and look at Nathaniel Phillips, and dude, if you watch my podcast or one of your friends tells you to watch this podcast, I am seriously not trying to offend you, but you are in the top 1% of the example of what I'm trying to express here. And you just listen to Nathaniel and look at him for a while in a video, and you'll get that psychic stench, that auric stench from spending too much time in the occult. And And what the Talamanca Review does is I try to like lasso the whole thing, man. Everything from Genesis to Revelation. I try to tell you this is the story, this is what's going on. Podcasts like Merging Dimensions Redo is an excellent example of what I'm trying to do on this podcast. Noahide Law and Temple Whores is another one. There's all kinds of great podcasts. I don't hit it out of the park every time I sit in front of the mic, but there's a lot of them that are just like grand slam home runs. Bases loaded, and I step up to the bat, and boom, it's out of the park. And I'm trying to give you what Spirit gives me or what I'm allowed to say publicly, because you can get limitations on expression. There is censorship in the growth of consciousness. You will get severe warnings not to speak about certain things. And it's no clandestine or nefarious force doing this. It's your own consciousness and spiritual law reinforcing itself in your unfolding consciousness. Like, okay, you've reached a level where you can know this, but not everybody can. It would be terrifying to them, so don't talk about it. And you just go, okay, I won't talk about that. And I followed these rules all my life, like from the moment I took initiation as a contemplative at the age of 19. And somehow everything's changed now. Like internally you can feel it, like all of the borders and boundaries have dropped away. You can talk about anything now. People are willing to listen, and people are willing to listen because we live in very difficult times. And they're difficult, particularly difficult for first worlders, because we developed a culture that planned for 25 years. You know, buy a house, have 2-3 kids. This is how much time and money you can spend on a vacation. A very, very structured life in which the worry of being human and the day-to-day worry of being human kind of went away. And maybe that wasn't such a good thing. Maybe human beings were not meant to live in such comfort, security, and leisure. I'm saying maybe. I'm not saying it's definitely. But the historical record shows us that people with comfort, security, and leisure generally become decadent. Very few people can be given comfort, leisure, and security and still be productive human beings. It either has to be coming from a deep sense of connection with the Creator, a deep sense of spiritual purpose, or it's maintained by absolute fear, which is how they do it in the underworld and how they do it in the world that really runs us, the world that selects our politicians and selects the governors of and chairmen of our central banks. These forces, right? But you get like everything else, you get a warning. You know, they tell you at the beginning, you know, the consequences of betrayal. Welcome to the club, Bruce. Glad to have you, buddy. You're going to have more pussy than you could ever. Do you like kids, Bruce? Because we can get that for you, too. Just one thing, Bruce. You can't ever mention any of this. And if you do, you know, based on the oath you took, the penalty is death. And sometimes they kill your family, too. And it'll look like an accident. Nobody will know you were murdered. Are you with us, Bruce? No, thank you. But that's the way it's done. And normal people in the middle, without extreme spiritual discipline, or without the shackles of fear and the guidance of death, most people given leisure, comfort, and security for the foreseeable future, most of them will become decadent, and some will become a combination of the two. I would say that people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and these other alien big brains, and that's what they are. Those are alien big brains. Those fuckers are hybrids for sure. Just look at them. They don't fucking seem normal like human beings. They could be third wave Dolores Cannon incarnations turning us toward a better future. I don't know, but I seriously doubt it. But they could be examples of straddling the fear and the decadence, right? But they work hard. Yeah, they work very, very hard. You know, the people in this system, they work very, very hard. It's and that's based on fear, I think. You know, fear of being cast out of the system, if you will. Well, that would be horrible for most people. Your country club, your status. You know, I'm always reminded of that line in Blade Runner, where Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, it's at the beginning of the movie. He goes in, he gets called back in because he's retired from his police service, and he was a Blade Runner, a cop whose specialty is hunting down rogue androids that blend right in with human beings. And he turns down his lieutenant's offer. And the lieutenant is played brilliantly by that. I think he's not dead yet. He's very old now, though. But M. Emmett Walsh was the actor. If you don't know who that is, he had a brilliant role as the private detective driving the Volkswagen Bug in the very first Joel and Ethan Coen brothers movie called Blood Simple, set in Texas. He had M. Emmett Walsh did a great job at that as well. But anyways, Harrison Ford tells him very flippantly, "Thank you very much, shove it up your ass, I'm not coming back to police work." And M. Emmett Walsh goes, "Well, hold on there, buddy. You know how this society works. There's cops and there's little people." Basically telling them, you know, we'll kill, do it or else. And that's more and more the world we're moving into. Any pretense that this is for our betterment is a lie. And if you ever bump into anyone who rationalizes what we're going through right now, I would probably, if you don't know them really well, politely disagree. If you know them well, then speak your mind in full emotion, okay? Because there were many ways to make a society better. Many, many ways that we could have gone to make this society better. And it seems like every decision we've made that was like a Boolean, a 0 or a 1, a 50-50 decision, every single one has been wrong since about 1900. And some of them you can see quite clearly in retrospect. You know, I always go back to free trade as my benchmark because it's so personal to me, because my father was on the Canadian negotiating team. And I remember the whole media cycle. This is why it's so branded in my brain. I think I kind of knew my old man was full of shit by the time I was 4 years old. But you don't know anything, you know. You don't have a fully formed language or lexicon or vocabulary when you're 4. So your spirit, your soul is telling you this guy's full of shit. He's crazy. But you don't know. You don't know the world you're living in. He's been in the world 30 years longer than you. Apparently the universe has assigned him to guide you, so you got to listen, right? But I was in my early 20s when I started journalism school, because I didn't go to university right after I never finished high school, actually. I started university at 22 and finished at 26. A little bit later than most people start at 18 and finish an undergraduate degree at 22. That's just the way my life worked out. And so I'd be going home for these Thanksgiving and Christmas vacations, and I hated them. I don't even know why I did them, actually, looking back at my life. I should have made a clean break, but there was still self-doubt, right? And I was learning everything I was learning in journalism school, and all my professors were saying, I don't think this free trade is going to be a good thing. Now, granted, most university professors, no matter what the program, are fairly liberal. Okay, liberalism is a characteristic of educators, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think excessive liberalism is a bad thing. But liberalism in and of itself is not a bad thing. In fact, any society that can get to a point where it can even contemplate liberalism, it has to be relatively advanced. It means you can trust your citizens to comport themselves in a certain way. And you don't have to be their daycare. You don't have to be the big police officer and say, hey, don't do that, don't do that. Just people will figure it out. Kind of like a classic example of liberalism is the German Autobahn. You spent $90,000 on a BMW 700 series. You want to go 180 kilometers from Berlin to whatever usually takes 2 hours. You want to do it in an hour and 15 minutes. We guarantee these highways are level and that the speed signs related to corners are accurate for G-force. Other than that, hit the pedal, man. And they don't have that many accidents on the Autobahn. And people go like 200 kilometers an hour, which is about 100, 110 miles per hour. That's liberalism. Okay? So liberalism is not an inherently bad thing. But at the same time, I was going through my old man, and I was just learning these things. And I would go home and I'd say, hey, Dad, I'm studying this at university, and they're saying this, this, and this about it. And the old man would always say, those fucking idiots don't know what they're talking about, Bruce. That's why they went into university in the first place, because they can't do anything, so they decided to teach. He always had some kind of like Archie Bunker, smarter than Archie Bunker, but some kind of chippy way of just a chippy sort of ad hominem that stripped any dignity away from anybody who countered his worldview until he got close to his death. And then he couldn't hold it back anymore. And I think the weight of his sin in life became almost unbearable. He was a man, I think, who was very afraid to pass the world, to leave the world, and very, in many levels, ashamed of his record. That's another thing they'll do in this system is, sometimes when you get a long life, it's just so that you can see things more clearly. But free trade was another 50-50 thing, right? Should we stay a national economy? Should we keep tariffs up to protect industries in our country? Or should we take our tariffs down and let competitors come in without a tariff? You see, tariffs were created to maintain national economies. If you want to have furniture builders in your country, you can't be, because the standard of living in Canada is higher in 1990. You can't have furniture makers from Mexico competing with you. Because the Mexican workers will work for $2 an hour. A Canadian furniture maker in like 1990, who's got a factory, is probably paying his employees like 60, 70,000, probably his top people, the designers and fabric cutters and everything, probably paying them $100,000 a year. How's he going to compete with Juan Sanchez down in Juarez, who's got, 50 people in a factory, and he's given them a plate of beans and rice in the middle of the day and $2 in their pocket when they leave the factory? And that furniture is being imported by a Canadian import company that will put about a 300% premium on the sticker, a 300% markup, and it's still 50% cheaper than anything you can get in Canada. So I could see all this way back then. And I used to say to the old man, well, look, an economy works because it's a circle. If you're saying our auto workers and other sectors in Canada make too much money and labor is demanding too much, all right, I get that. That should be settled in a public debate between politicians and labor leaders. And frankly, if you go back and watch, you could find it on YouTube. Just go American Automobile Association. The AAA. I think it was American Auto AAU, American Auto Workers, American Auto Workers, and the CAW, Canadian Auto Workers. And we had this fierce leader of the CAW. I think his name was Buzz Hargrove in the late 80s, 90s in Canada. And you go back into the late 80s and you watch news clips and you'll see prime ministers and presidents. Remember what Reagan did with the air traffic controllers? He fired them all. This is in the 80s too, like late 80s, right? Fired all the air traffic controllers. And so these labor disputes were going on all the time. And it is true that our labor costs got very high. And so what happened was the great thinkers came up with free trade. And what it did, it killed all labor, killed most factory work. Okay? And I used to ask my old man, I'd say, well, how are we going to have an economy if all the consumers go away? Well, what do you mean? Well, if we allow Mexican-made automobiles into Canada tariff-free, it will destroy the Canadian auto worker because the Mexican auto worker is about 10 cents on the dollar or 5 cents on the dollar by labor. And labor is X percentage of the cost of output. And my old man would just rationalize all these things like a Cray computer. Well, it's just an evolving economy, Bruce. And, it basically gaslit me. And to be honest, he was gaslighting himself. He hadn't had a real spiritual wake-up yet. He'd had a minor one when he quit drinking, but wasn't big enough to really make him live a good and a moral life. So free trade is an example of one of these 50-50 bets we made. And every one we've made, like I said, since 1900 has been wrong. And when you reach that conclusion, and I hope you're with me on this, I hope you see what I'm saying, because it's not debatable, really, that this has been a planned evolution of society, or an unfolding of society masked to look like a natural evolution through technological renaissance. Okay, but it isn't, because the technology is coming from very negative sources, okay? Very negative sources. All the technology we have, I should say all the technology we've been given, because this isn't human invention. You don't go from shitting in a field to Cray computers in 3 or 4 generations. It's just not within an evolutionary model. It means that all this genetic potential has been sitting dormant in us for like 100 million years, and we accessed 90% of it. We came up to 10%. We had fences on our cow pastures, and we were able to sand the toilet seats on our outdoor shitters, and we were able to figure out that throwing sawdust on the shit and piss would waft down the smell a little bit. And we were able to figure all those things out in the 10 million years we've been dragging our knuckles on the planet. And the last 90% we figured out in 120 years. Does that sound like a sound model of evolution to you? Of course not, right? And then you can throw Tartaria and Jason cycles in and factor them in as part of the thinking process. Not that I necessarily think Tartaria is correct or Jason is correct. I personally think there's something deeper involved here, and it has to do with profound tinkering with time that began with extraterrestrial technology after World War II. And I think a lot of these phantom timelines coming in, like Tartaria, never actually existed in our physical timeline. But because of the time travel, they created alternative timelines. Now they all have to be brought into one timeline. And how that's done is it just sort of gets merged, and you can end up having ideas about something. You don't even know how you have these ideas. Or everybody starts to see this thing about Tartaria. Why? Why in like 2015, 10 years ago? We've been looking at black and white photos for 120 years. We've had magazines and newspapers and academics and researchers for 300-400 years, longer if you factor in the various monastic orders of the church, because they were really a form of university in themselves, keepers of knowledge, expanders of knowledge, preservers of knowledge, which is really a kind of what we see the mandate of the universities as these days. But they did all that, you know? So none of it really adds up. And then so you're left asking the question, what is steering the ship of human evolution? And it's spiritual. And by spiritual, I mean literally, it's like, where do ideas come from? Right? Where did the idea for fiber optic come from? Somebody do a forensic analogy of the origin of fiber optic for me. And, or try, because you're not going to be able to solve it. There is no origin story for fiber optic. They'll have some bullshit on the internet about like Bell Labs in like 1970, but it's all bullshit. It's all reverse engineered or delivered to us by alien allies. Okay? So we arrive at the conclusion, which is that we are in an alien agenda on planet Earth. And we don't have to be in an alien agenda. Okay? This idea that we were forced, or those human beings that have interacted with the aliens, it's all bullshit. Okay? There is an equitable balance to everything in this world. Okay? Just because we made deals with bad extraterrestrials doesn't mean we can't break them, and breaking of that contract would not be enforced by more benign extraterrestrial forces. Forces equivalent to the threat of the force we contracted with. So this binding agreement bullshit is complete nonsense. We continue to honor these reptilian gray relationships because the humans who have adopted this agency as their expression and cohabitation in consciousness are the worst of us, and they're quite comfortable cooperating with these entities. So this brings me really to what is ostensibly only the introduction of today's podcast. And today we're going to talk about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Because it's interesting that I just talked about Sergio Rojas last podcast. And it must have been some kind of precognition I was getting, because I did not know what was coming down the pipes. I'll let my fellow Canadian, Viva Fry, tell you all about it, and then I'll see you in about 9.5 minutes.
Remember, everybody, you will own nothing and be happy, even if it means the government will take everything you have. Viva Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida rumbler in my home office, and I'm old enough to remember that crazy old conspiracy theory, Agenda 2030, you will own nothing and be happy. Well, it looks like it's coming to reality sooner than later to a place near you called Canada. A story went viral, or I should say a tweet. An image went viral of a letter coming from the city of Richmond in British Columbia, notifying private landowners that as a result of a Supreme Court decision that recognized rights to a native tribe as relates to unceded territory, that it might impact privately held land and that you should stay tuned for more coverage. Now, the full impact of the court ruling has yet to be determined, but the city of Richmond has taken it upon themselves to send a notice that has alarmed quite a few people, as in anybody with a sense of private property and basic God-given rights. For those of you who may have missed it, from Ryan Garrettson, at Ryan Garrettson, this is insane, from the city of Richmond in Canada. Quote, if you look at the draft map attached to the briefing, your property is located within the claim area outlined in green. For those whose property is in the area outlined in black, the court has declared Aboriginal title to your property, which may compromise the status and validity of your ownership, end quote. Do you know how much unceded land there is in provinces across Canada? Do you think that this will just end here in Richmond, British Columbia? And here you have the letter from the city of Richmond. Notice to registered owner. Please take note that the recent BC Supreme Court decision in Cowichan Tribes versus Canada 2025 BCSC 1490 made some very important decisions which could negatively affect the title to your property. A briefing paper prepared by City of Richmond staff is attached for your reference. If you look at the draft map attached to the briefing, your property is located within the claim area outlined in green. For those whose property is in the area outlined in black, the court has declared Aboriginal title to your property, which may compromise the status and validity of your ownership. This was mandated without any prior notice to the landowners. The entire area outlined in green is claimed on appeal by the Cowichan First Nations. Given the serious implications of this court decision and the pending appeal, the city is hosting an informal session to be held on Tuesday, October 28, 2025 at 7 p.m. at Richmond City Hall. We hope that you can attend to learn more about this important situation. And then here you have the contact information for anyone who's interested or affected. This is going to be complicated for pretty much everybody, even those who have studied Aboriginal law in Canada. I studied Aboriginal law when I did my law degree, though I never practiced in the field. What basically happens here is a tribe sues the government on the basis that there is unceded land. We're going to get to that in a second, that there's unceded land that is currently being occupied and that they actually have title and rights to that unceded land because it wasn't ceded to the government or private interest by way of any treaty. But don't take my word for it by any means. There's a newsletter from one of the most prominent law firms in Canada, Osler, and they describe the situation as follows. Osler Indigenous Law Blog, The Longest Trial, A Big Impact, Cowichan's Aboriginal Title Victory. Following one of the longest trials in Canadian history, the Supreme Court of British Columbia, the court, released its landmark decision in Cowichan Tribes versus Canada, Attorney General 2025, holding that the historical descendants of the Cowichan people, the plaintiffs or Cowichan, have Aboriginal title over a portion of the total claim area sought at the south shore of Lulu Island in Richmond, British Columbia, the Cowichan title lands. This is the first time in Canadian history Aboriginal title has been established over lands that included fee simple private ownership, resulting in significant uncertainty for governments, fee simple landowners, and Indigenous communities with overlapping title claims. And then at the end, in the discussion section, while the court seemed to rely on the fact that the Cowichan were not seeking to displace private owners of the lands subject to the title claim, the decision now leaves the affected private landowners and governments, as well as landowners and governments across the rest of Canada where Aboriginal title is asserted, with key outstanding questions. For example, practically, to what extent can the Cowichan now influence how the fee simple lands over which they hold Aboriginal title are used? What recourse, if any, do private landowners have against the government if the court's declaration restricts their use and enjoyment of their land? What does a good faith reconciliation of fee simple ownership over Aboriginal title lands look like? Not surprisingly, the province, federal government, VFPA, and Richmond have each commenced appeals on the court's decision. Other Indigenous groups, the Musqueam Indian Band and Tsawwassen First Nation, have also commenced appeals, as has the Cowichan in respect of the court's decision to recognize Aboriginal title over only a portion of the total land area the Cowichan claimed. Regardless of how these appeals are decided, we expect this case will ultimately be appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. And just because I realize I didn't define what fee simple means in Aboriginal law, fee simple refers to the highest possible interest in land granted by the Crown, which traditionally confers ownership rights like exclusive control, use, and transfer. However, the relationship between fee simple and Aboriginal title is complex because Aboriginal title is considered a prior and senior interest that predates Crown grants, meaning fee simple interests are subject to it. This has led to legal questions about how the two forms of ownership can coexist and has raised concerns about the security of fee simple title in areas where Aboriginal title is asserted. We have all been making fun of people like that RCMP police chief at the Nova Scotia press conference as relates to the missing children, starting off with a land recognition. We are hereby on the unceded territory of X, Y, and Z. We are now seeing the impact of what actually happens when the government starts recognizing unceded territory of Aboriginals.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Corporal Carly McCann, Provincial Public Information Officer for the Nova Scotia RCMP. Thank you all for being here today. Bonjour, je suis la Caporale Carly McCann, agent d'information publique pour la GRC en Nouvelle-Écosse. Merci de votre présence aujourd'hui. First, I acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I also recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kma'ki known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years.
All of a sudden, what started off as something of a ridiculous virtue signaling gesture now turns into Aboriginals claiming rights over that unceded land with the help of the government, and now they win in the court, and lo and behold, what's going to happen of private ownership on these unceded lands? Nobody knows. From Juno News, who's also covering the story, homeowners warned private property may be in doubt following BC court's Indigenous ruling. Hundreds of Richmond, British Columbia homeowners have been warned their private property could be jeopardized by a recent court ruling granting Aboriginal title to the Cowichan tribes. Alex Zoltan, True North. Hundreds of Richmond, British Columbia homeowners have been warned their private property could be jeopardized by a recent court ruling granting Aboriginal title to the Cowichan tribes. The letters have raised growing fears that similar decisions could undermine land ownership across British Columbia, as several other cases involving Aboriginal title are before the courts. The ruling issued earlier this year granted, quote, dual title, end quote, ownership to hundreds of acres of private property in Richmond, a large metropolitan suburb of Vancouver and home to BC's largest and only international airport. This means certain property would be owned both privately and under Aboriginal title. Although the ruling didn't go so far as to call for the requisitioning of private property, it remains unclear what impact the dual title will have on lending, tax implications, or private property ownership generally. Now, part of me wants to believe that the city of Richmond is issuing this letter specifically and deliberately to alarm the residents so that they make something of a public issue out of this, so that it becomes newsworthy and that they can use that public pressure in the courts to cause the higher courts to undo the damage done by this lower court. Bear in mind, the BC Supreme Court is the lowest level court in British Columbia. It goes Supreme Court of British Columbia, Court of Appeals, and then Supreme Court of Canada. So part of me wants to believe that the city of Richmond is deliberately trying to antagonize or spark up fears among the general population to create political pressure. But another part of me also thinks, oh, what's going to happen in all of this if the government now has to negotiate on private property as a result of this court ruling that grants rights to unceded land? What an accidental, fortuitous, coincidental sort of benefit this would procure to the government, who now themselves might lay claim to that private land as a result of their obligations now to negotiate with Aboriginal interests. Will it lead to expropriation with compensation? Will it lead to outright expropriation by the federal government? Because after all, they've now got to claim that land so that they can now go and negotiate with those Aboriginals who were just granted title over that unceded land. And now you might actually fully appreciate the actual legal consequences of these idiot virtue signaling government officials getting up there and recognizing that they are on unceded land. And now the courts have said, well, if it's unceded, it belongs to the Aboriginals because they didn't give it to you by way of treaty. And now they have rights over other people's private property. And if it means the government's going to take your property away, by goodness, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And speaking of being happy, you know what would make me happy is if you hit the subscribe button and turned on notifications and dropped a comment in the comment section below, because it feeds the algorithm. This is what's going on in Canada, people.
Coming soon to a communist hellhole near you.
I will be following this story. I might even try to get a lawyer from Osler or another law firm to come on to explain the situation, but this is where it stands right now. Uncertainty, to say the least, but uncertainty is good for government.
We don't submit to terror. We make the terror.
And with that said, if you like my stuff, you know what to do, but most importantly, exercise, eat healthy, sunlight, talk to people in real life, and now you know your vlog. Peace out, peeps. Booyah!
Well, there you have it, folks. So, let's dig into this because I've prepared some research material and it's worth going over. So, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, generally called Undrip, U-N-D-R-I-P, Undrip. It's a non-treaty, which is referred to in legal circles as soft law. And it's an instrument adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2007. Very interesting year for it to be adopted, as far as I'm concerned. Everything sort of like really starts to accelerate after 9/11. As I say, I mean, I'm doing my best to show people on the Telemaker review that there are no accidents in what's going on. And if you're a Westerner and you've been gaslit into feeling guilty about being a Westerner, being white, being from Christian heritage, even if you don't practice Christianity, stop it. It's all bullshit. This is not karma. If this were karma, this is not how karma works. It's not done this way. This is a giant mind fuck. Okay? To destroy a people and destroy a culture. And why? Well, because whatever else wants to take over the world, they see us as the only threat. It's that simple. So you could take the destruction of the white race, its culture, its heritage, its land mass, its land heritage, its connection to land. You could take it almost as an alien or an Anunnaki agenda. And then when you look at the agency of it in human form, you will see the descendants and the psychological dependence upon the Anunnaki, masquerading as religious people and holy men. And you're not going to get that on Gaia. You're just not going to get it on Gaia. What the hell is going on here? Okay. So let's get more into this. So despite the fact that it's not a treaty, it's a global baseline for indigenous rights, and it's used in 5 practical ways. Number 1, written into domestic law. Number 2, used by courts and regional human rights bodies to interpret binding law. 3, embedded in government policy and shared decision-making. 4, operationalized by international finance standards that require free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC. And it's that financial dimension all the time, right? And 5, invoked in human rights monitoring, urgent measures, and advocacy. Now, the 2019 killing of the Bribri leader Sergio Rojas, known very well by all my cable car partners in my tourism business, illustrates how the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People frames state duties to protect Indigenous leaders, restore lands, and ensure justice. So basically, Undrip sets minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples. And how it's used in practice. So domestic incorporation into law, Canada, federal, the United Nations, the Undrip, actually I should read the whole thing. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, 2021, requires the government of Canada to align federal laws with UNDRIP. So this came in, snuck that in at first year of COVID. I mean, are you starting to fucking put all this shit together, man? Like, I don't want to be alone in this. You know what I mean? I hope you, my listeners, I'm getting through. Right? And spread the word, okay? And either send them the podcast or just watch it 3 times and explain it really well to them, because I'm killing myself here, right? So it requires the government of Canada to align federal laws with Undrip, co-develop an action plan, and publish annual progress reports in cooperation with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Inuit are the natives of the far north. We used to call them Eskimos. That's now considered racist. And Métis are mixed breed. They're a combination of European and native, and they go back a couple hundred years. British Columbia, Canada, the declaration on, now this, so this is a province writing its own, adding to its own relationship with the United Nations, independent of what the federal government did. So, and welcome to Canada. It's just a giant fucking gaggle of idiotic virtue signalers, not realizing they're lighting fire to their own home, and the curtains are polyester, and it's going to go up in a second. They're so stupid, okay? And by the way, that's another thing that comfort, leisure, and security produces, because decadence produces stupidity. Believe it or not, human beings are at their smartest when the survival index is at its highest. Okay, so the more comfort, leisure, and security you give to human beings, the stupider they get. Okay, with very few exceptions, going back to the beginning of the podcast. You either have to have an extremely good relationship with the Creator, or you have to be operating by an absolute and enforceable fear-based rule set. So organized crime, secret society, government wet work, that kind of stuff. Other than that, the seriously spiritually disciplined people who've truly created a connection with the divine and know that if they don't live that way, they're compromising themselves in this moment and in their non-physical life, because they know it's no longer a belief. I have to act a certain way because I know better. And when you know better, the consequences of sin are more severe. The karma is more severe because you're supposed to know better. And people straitjacketed by fear. Now that leaves about 99% of the people in the middle. And you've got the 1% I represent trying my best to wake people up. And then you've got the 1 or 2% that are the fear-based model, the organized crime, the secret societies, the bankers, fear of losing lifestyle. I explain all of this in The Light of Darkness, you know. I explain that so much of what goes on in the world. It used to be the devil had to offer somebody something incredible to buy their soul. Okay? Like Robert Johnson getting his phenomenal talent with the guitar, the famous blues story. Now, all the devil needs to offer is guaranteed income and a good pension. And you sell your soul. The devil has been institutionalized. I don't know why people keep conceptualizing the devil as an individual being. It's ridiculous. The worst aspects of human nature come out in institutions. Okay? So British Columbia, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, DRIPA, they wrote their own version of it. They call it DRIPA, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, 2019. So a couple years before the federal government in Canada. Affirms Undrip applies to BC laws, mandates alignment of provincial laws with Undrip, requires an action plan and annual reporting, and enables consent-based decision-making agreements with Indigenous governing bodies. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has developed standards on consultation consistent with Undrip, including blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so British Columbia requires law alignment with Undrip, co-developed action plans, annual reporting to the legislature, and enables consent-based decision-making agreements. Okay? Look, Okay, so then we have to ask ourselves, well, who's running the United Nations? Most of the native peoples in the world were dramatically changed by the encroachment of Europeans. Us. This happened about 400 years ago, and it largely happened in the Americas. Now, I think every continent or populous region of the world had developed what we would call civilizations by this time. China was very well developed. India was very well developed. Do you know that in the 17th century, India accounted for a full 1/4 of the world's gross domestic products? Their silk, fabrics, cottons, spices. It was just an exceptional culture till the English got there. And the Middle East was fairly well evolved, right? I mean, you had, at least in the Gulf there, the Mediterranean. So you've got, Sicily down there on the ocean. You've got Greece, you've got Persia, you've got Israel, and so there was this sharing, and that was a very developed society. I think one of your first clues is written language. Okay, when the linguists are done their work, then there's an explosion in a population. And for some reason, that just never happened in the Americas, with the exception of perhaps the architecture of the Mayans and the Aztecs. But I think, again, that was negative influence. The Aztec, not the Mayans. I think the Mayans were the result of a benign influence. And here I mean extraterrestrial, non-human intelligence assisting them, working with them. And the Aztecs clearly went into some blood relationship with something similar to the reptilians and the Greys, because that became a harvesting society and a sacrifice society. Okay? So when we think about this in its totality, it's really kind of mind-boggling. So what is to prevent landowners and if you don't know British Columbia, Richmond is a little bit north of Vancouver, but it's a huge city. I think it's got a huge Punjabi Sikh population now, a lot of old white families. But why would a BC court give them this land? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And could you not reasonably ask the question, was it fraud when the municipality of Richmond charged me X number of dollars for a building permit to build my home? Was it fraud when the land registry in Richmond changed the title on the home to my name when the bank loaned me the money and I paid off my mortgage, and I have a document with my name on it saying I have title to this land? Now, if a municipal infrastructure with a mayor following municipal regulations of land regulations set out by the federal government of Canada, if they did all that and it was a lie, well, then it was fraud. At what point does government become culpable? So what you see going on now is they begin what I call the 2030 collapse, and Canadians don't know what I know about what's already happened here in Costa Rica with Sergio Rojas and the Bribris. Do you see now why I started a foundation for the cable car? And I've had these discussions on the reserve. And they're well aware of the fact that most of the land my earthbag house is on, they could probably claim. And they would probably win. It would be about 10 years from now, but it takes a while, and you need funding to go to court and everything, but they'd probably win. But they're trying to do it a different way. They're trying to buy the property back, which I find amazing. I find them very, very pleasant people to live with. I find them a largely positive people, very full of love and life. Just a remarkable people to call my neighbors. I mean, some of them go bad, and if they go bad, they go really bad. They become like the worst enforcers in the cartels, the ex-natives, people coming out of the mountains, right? So that's what's going on. And it's just exactly like Viva Fry said. It's just another example of how you will own nothing and never have been happier. And the moment I learned about when I first read about Sergio Rojas, and I read about it right around the time it happened, but I didn't know about the Bri land trial at the UN. And then I did all my background research and everything, and I said, oh my God, they're going to use this all over the world. They're going to use this to get people off of land in Canada. Won't go over in the United States. That's why the solution in the United States is going to be violence. It's going to be civil war. And the Americans have earned the right to war. And earning the right to war is a spiritual right. I'm not speaking derisively here. And Canada has no right to war because Canadians just don't have that internal sense of self anymore. It's like unbelievable how fucking ridiculous Canadians have become. No offense to my Canadian listeners, No offense to my buddy Jim in Panama, who's Canadian. No offense to you, Carrie, or any of the other Canadian listeners. But this is an untenable situation. So how does this tie into my most popular topic, which is the Third Temple, Jerusalem, and the Sanhedrin? Well, this is the global correlate to their land claim in the Middle East. So they're saying we were displaced from this land 2,000 years ago. We are the indigenous tribal people of this land, even though these Ashkenazi fucks have no genetic connection with. They're not Jews. Genetically, they're not Jews. Okay? I don't care they started learning Hebrew and studying the Torah in whenever they made them do it. I think it was, the 8th, 9th, or 12th century, sometime around that. The Khazars were a warring people who practiced witchcraft and darkness and what we now call Satanism. And I think it was the Tsar of Russia, or a collective of regional leaders, that said, look, you gotta choose one of the Abrahamic religions or we're going to wipe you out. And they chose Judaism. And now Judaism is completely satanic at a social political level. You can't tell me that this is not satanic. There's a lot of Jews who have, real Jews, like Sephardic Jews and Jews, who have just been completely mind-fucked by this Ashkenazi takeover of Judaism and all its implications. All right? So if the Jews deserve their land in Israel, then they're going to make it look like there's this massive change going on in the world and we're correcting, and their God, or God, is restoring balance to the world. So this, from a Jewish perspective, this is evidence of the return of the Messiah. But of course, the Messiah, as the Jews define it, has nothing to do with what you or I would call God. Okay? Whatever dark, vengeful entity they're worshiping in their black magic rituals, which is about what their religion is now. It's the most expressive form of ritual magic on the planet. Judaism has degenerated to it's just a diabolical expression of vitriol and contempt for humanity. The literal and diametric opposite of what a spiritual process is supposed to produce. And yet they pat each other on the back, Rabbi Shmuley is a holy man. Rabbi Coleman is a holy man. Well, they're not holy by the universal global definition of what a holy man is. And there's all this perversion of language that is attendant with this pomposity, which is recognized and endorsed by simple-minded media agencies in the West, again, for paycheck and salary and lifestyle, right? Because they're all pretty much Jewish-owned. So this is what the 2030, this is what the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, I'm convinced it was created to do this. Further displacement of European peoples, transmigrated European peoples, people who left their European homeland and came to North America. Now, in the case of Canada, there's ample room for reserves. The 1 or 2 million natives still existing in Canada could easily sustain the lifestyle of the 17th century. They could literally be hunters and gatherers. There is so much fucking land in Canada. Right? So, I think this is completely asinine. I think it's fucking nonsense. But it's just the beginning. You're going to see more and more. And Canada seems to be a massive test case for this. And wait, mark my words. Wait and see if this doesn't happen in Australia. If the Australian Aboriginals do not make land claims on what they're calling unceded land. Because it seems to be a trend that's going to begin and not end anytime soon. So I've seen it in Canada. I've seen it in Costa Rica. The Costa Rica example went all the way. Like national police. The natives, under their own authority, Sergio Rojas was murdered evicting a Costa Rican family. The Costa Rican government left the natives to do it themselves, didn't give them color of law or association of law by sending federal police with them to break the news to the Costa Ricans. It was just a shit show the way the whole thing was handled. And it's going to get messy in Canada too, because those West Coast natives they're very angry and political. They're the angriest and most political natives in Canada, the BC natives. I had a Mohawk friend who came from that area. His name was John Boncourt. And his Mohawk name was Dakajiwa, which means strikes the sky, like lightning. He is a good friend of mine. He read Coureur de Bois. And he got murdered, like about, I don't know, slightly after the time George Bush got into office. But he was a really cool dude, man. One of the smartest dudes I ever met. And just a natural human being. Anyways, this is the Talamanca review for tonight. Not really sure what I'm going to title this. Maybe Undrip U. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca review.